Hey everybody, welcome into Flag for Discussion, episode 6 for Monday, May 19th. My name is Farbod. No Jace today. Jace is off on a fun family adventure, and I'm sure he'll fill us all in on where he's at, what he's up to, and all the fun stuff that they've done so far. But that just means for you guys today, it is just me, and it's a little daunting to be honest, but we got another pack show prep for you. I want to start. First of all, we're going to start with not necessarily a weekly series, but I want to kind of dive in on the most interesting coaches of college football. Not necessarily the winningest. We don't always need to talk about who's going to win the national championship, who's going to be the most, who's going to score the most points. I want to talk about who's going to be the most interesting to follow for all college football fans, whether you're a diehard like me and Jace, or you are just getting into the sport. Then we're going to get into Kirby Smart. Is he finally taking the reins of the voice of college football amongst the coaches? When Nick Saban retired, we'll get into it, but there was a vacuum kind of left. Saban spent a lot of time being that voice, having that microphone. Is Kirby Smart finally kind of taking it over? And then I made an observation as I was preparing for this podcast, and it ended up being one of our topics. Just I really want to talk about how cruel college football can be, the schedules, and how they can pan out. So we're going to get into that. As always, though, don't forget to follow our socials. We are on Twitter at F4Discussion. YouTube, please subscribe at Flagged for Discussion. And TikTok, we're getting there. At Flagged, the number 4 Discussion. As I said, we are everywhere on Apple Podcasts as well, on Spotify, on wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to listen to this while you're on your commutes, we've gotten a lot of really fun reviews from family and friends, kind of asking for us to drop another pod because they have a long commute or anything of the sorts. I would also ask anyone who's listening, try out the YouTube clips for a little bit. I'm gonna constantly try to innovate the YouTube, make it more, improve the quality of the show, and try to deliver more value for all of our viewers. So, with that said, let's get into our first topic. Like I said, I want to talk about not just the most successful coaches in college football. I want to talk about the most interesting as well, and which coaches you should be following as we are approaching the end of the off season, as we are approaching the summer and heading into the season itself. First, I want to talk about the guy to my, I guess on the viewers, it would be on the right. Let's talk about Marcus Freeman, Notre Dame. So, why is Marcus Freeman interesting? They just came off a national championship loss. Obviously, he's a successful coach. They had a tremendous season last year. But to me, Marcus Freeman's a really interesting case because coming into this year, he had gone 9-4 in his first year after taking over for Brian Kelly in Notre Dame, and then he went 10-3 the year following. Each of those years had a kind of a gut-wrenching loss. If you remember his first year, they started out 1-2, 1-3, and that was a team that was looking to do some special things. Brian Kelly didn't leave Marcus Freeman a black hole of a roster to take over. Marcus Freeman took over, and obviously it wasn't his team. It wasn't the way he wanted to play ball, but they had a very disappointing year in year one under Marcus Freeman, 9-4. Then we went into year 2, 10-3. All right, we're getting better. And winning's not linear in college football. That's a really good season. That's a really good place to be. But 10-3 also with the schedule sometimes Notre Dame can have. It's either a great season because they can have some terrible schedules as an independent, or it can be kind of just an extreme disappointment. So when we're looking at that 10-3, that also that was one of those losses was to Ohio State at home. It was essentially one of the more disappointing feeling 10-3 seasons ever. Now we're going into year 3. Expectations are high, and they're undefeated. They're playing really well. They lose to NIU. I don't know if you guys remember, but going into that game, everyone obviously expected Notre Dame to blow out NIU. There was no one with a pulse would tell you that that game should have been even remotely close. But as the game went on, we saw Notre Dame starting to make mistakes, and then NIU capitalizing on them. NIU ends up winning the game, and the aftermath of that wasn't just is Notre Dame frauds, but it's, is Marcus Freeman really the guy there? And I think we all know how the last season played out. They ended up winning out, making it to the college football playoff, winning several rounds, losing in the national championship to Ohio State. So there's a lot of questions in general regarding Marcus Freeman. But he seemed to have dispelled a lot of those this past year. They play really tough physical ball. They want to run it. They have Jeremiah Love coming into this year. Now, why is he the most interesting to me? I say all of that, last 4 minutes or however long that was to say Notre Dame should be very good. They have a manageable schedule this year. It's not easy. They start out the season right away, August 31st against Miami. The next week, they follow that up with a game against Texas A&M. Then a couple weeks later, they have NC State and USC back-to-back. The rest of the games should be fairly solid wins, but they do have some tough games in there. They're replacing their quarterback, Riley Leonard, who led them to the national championship game. They're just in a very interesting spot to me. Which version of Notre Dame are we going to get? Are we going to get the team that's looking to make last year a regularity? Is Marcus Freeman going to be that guy to truly push Notre Dame past the very good conversation to elite status? I'm not saying they are not a blue blood or they haven't been blue bloods. That's not what I'm saying. But more than anything, one of the reasons Brian Kelly left to LSU was he always thought you could win a lot at Notre Dame. You could build good teams. But once you got to the playoff, your teams wouldn't stack up. Your teams weren't elite. Well, if Marcus Freeman can kind of dispel those rumors and go into this next year being, let me regroup. If he can dispel those rumors going into this next year and put up another incredible season at Notre Dame, then we have to really start talking about Notre Dame as one of those teams, along with the Ohio States, the Alabamas, the Georgias, who you should just expect to win national championships regularly, be contending for the national championship on an annual basis, and never really rebuilding, always reloading. So going into this year, I think we need to look at their win total. We're not sponsored by any major betting sites or betting platforms, so obviously that's something we're interested in. But on FanDuel, their win total for the season is 10.5. I mentioned the game against Miami, USC, NC State. They got Pitt and a couple more ACC teams on the back half of their schedule. I believe Stanford and Cal are also in there. To me, I would have to take the under on that, and that's not because I don't think that they're going to repeat onto what they did last year. But I think they have such tough games, and if you look at their quarterback option, they're replacing the senior Riley Leonard at quarterback with either Kevin Minchie or CJ Carr. A lot of people think it's going to be the true freshman CJ Carr who's going to take over. Which at that point, do you trust a true freshman, no matter how good they are, to be the guy for your team and lead you to a promised land? I personally wouldn't be that confident about that. Look, CJ Carr could come in, have a Trevor Lawrence-esque season as a true freshman, and truly lead Notre Dame to even greater heights than they had last year. Not that they can get that much further, but in general, I'm having some doubts. Looking at this year, they have Jeremiah Love returning, their superstar running back. They're always going to be good along the offensive line. Their defense is always stout. For me, the biggest question is, do they have the pass catchers, and do they have the guy to pass those guys the ball? And that, in essence, is why this is most interesting to me. It's not the fact that this is the national championship loser. It's not the fact that they had an incredible year, so we want to track them. It's the fact that everything last year almost everything last year was perfect for Notre Dame. They had a heart-wrenching, unacceptable loss to NIU. Outside of that, the regular season, they went unscathed. So looking at how their last season went in general, Notre Dame fans should be pretty happy. Obviously, you don't want the national championship game loss, but can they do it again? That's why it's interesting. I want to follow this whole this season of Notre Dame, not as just following them for rankings or power ratings or how their teams will stack up against one another. I'm really interested in just the long-term trajectory of this program and how it all will line up. As I mentioned, I would take the under on their 10.5 win total. Would it shock me if they won 11 games in the regular season, 12 games in the regular season? No. I think Miami's coming in with a bunch of question marks. USC has a bunch of question marks on their own. You expect their offensive line, defensive line to constantly win the battles in the trenches. So it just comes down to CJ Carr, Marcus Freeman's coaching, how they're developing that offense. And the nice part, I forgot to mention this earlier. The nice part in general is that Notre Dame is not a QB-centric team. That's the counterpoint to my, can a true freshman lead this team to a national championship? Notre Dame will not rely on CJ Carr to win them games. But once they get to those games, if they are in the fourth quarter tied against Miami, you're going to need CJ Carr or Kevin Minchie, the sophomore, whoever they choose, to be that guy. In general, I think Marcus Freeman is an excellent coach, but it's just super interesting for me after I wouldn't even call it horrendous. After the disappointing prior 2 seasons, they finally jumped over the curve of expectation, despite having an unacceptable loss within that season to NIU. So can they repeat but elevate themselves once again? Can they join the Blue Bloods? I rambled a lot there on Marcus Freeman, but he is one of the most interesting coaches in college football to me for that reason. Number 2 most interesting coach. I'm going to get a sip of water real quick. Number 2 most interesting college football coach for me. We're going to head down to Utah. And for those that might not follow Utah a ton, for those that might not be Big 12 fans, Pac-12 fans, Mountain West fans, Kyle Whittingham has been the coach at Utah for 3 different conferences, which is unbelievable to even think about. But the last couple of years, I would say the Utes had pretty high expectations. They came in with a pretty stout run game. They're always gonna have a stout defensive front, strong offensive linemen. They have one of the best players on the offensive line this year in Spencer Fano. And Kyle Whittingham's entering year 21 right now. Why is he interesting to me? The last couple of years, it's kind of felt like they've been waiting out Cam Rising. Cam Rising obviously led them to Pac-12 titles. There's heights that this program hadn't seen before. They lost, I know, but they lost in the Rose Bowl to Ohio State. But that kind of felt like a moment for this program that was setting them up for future and better success and constant growth and development as they keep building. For people don't realize, or people don't like to think about this, but Utah wasn't a traditional power. They became one in the Pac-12 towards the end, but as I mentioned, Kyle Whittingham was a Mountain West coach at Utah. He took over for Urban Meyer. They were never, quote-unquote, supposed to be in this position, but then they kept building. They kept grinding, and they built this program to be up to a level of not only competitiveness within the Power 4, Power 5 at the time, but they built this program to beat those other schools. I remember 2 years ago, maybe it was last year, Florida was coming to Utah, and the quarterback situation was pretty paltry. We didn't know, Cam Rising wasn't ready. They somehow squeaked it out. They using their great fans, and everything that they've got going on there, they somehow squeaked it out. We know how great they were in 2019 and 2018, 2021. But then this last couple of years, they've kind of taken, not a nosedive, but they've gone 10-4, 10-4, and now 8-5. And then last year, 5-7. That was the last 4 years. So obviously they are a high-level program who's, I wouldn't even say fallen on hard times, but has had 2 down years. Cam Rising is finally gone. He's beloved in the Utah circles. I would also argue he's also kind of hated in some Utah circles just because of how long he was there, and the fact that he technically could have stayed for another 4 years. I mean, not 4 years, for another season at Utah. But why are they interesting? The Big 12 is an anyone's team conference. Anyone can win that conference as long as they are well coached, they have the talent, and they can compete. There was a joke on a couple podcasts last year that like every spread, every line you see in a Big 12 game is about 3.5. So with that said, this isn't a slight at Arizona State or Texas Tech or Kansas State. I just think Utah is going to be a power in the Big 12 once again. It might not be this year, but they are certainly really, really interesting. So I'm looking to my right at my monitor. They're bringing in the New Mexico quarterback, Devin Dampier, to be their quarterback. For those that don't know, let's just run through his stats. Last year at New Mexico, he threw 12 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, and I believe just over 2,000 passing yards. 2,768 passing yards. So not just over, but not numbers to be really excited about. Not like super sexy, over 3,500 yards, 30 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. You normally don't want a 1-to-1 touchdown and interception ratio. But listen to this as well. On the ground, Dampier had 1,166 rushing yards and 19 rushing touchdowns. So that brings him up to 29 total touchdowns on the year and 12 interceptions. So with that said, he's an electric football player. And he is, God willing, with health, going to be the first high-profile quarterback, first electric quarterback that they've had there in a couple years. Cam Rising was hurt. I'm not counting him. Isaac Wilson has kind of disappointed, so I can't really count that either. But Dampier is coming into this year, electric arm when they need it, electric on the ground, breaks a lot of tackles, and the only thing that makes that dynamic even better for Utah, in my opinion, is Utah also hired the New Mexico offensive coordinator. So naturally, there is some familiarity between the quarterback and the offensive coordinator. It's not just a transfer coming into a new team, it's a transfer coming in, but he knows the system because the system is the one that he just ran the year before. I'm looking at FanDuel. FanDuel has the Utah win total at 7.5. After walking through their schedule, I would say their schedule is easier than Notre Dame's and Marcus Freeman, but it still has some potential hiccups in there. I could see anywhere from 8-4 to 10-2. If Dampier clicks, they could easily sneak up and contend for the Big 12 this year. And look, we're all not necessarily waiting, but Kyle Whittingham has hinted at retirement in the last couple of years. And this past year, he noted the "I'm back" memo, the same thing, the Michael Jordan thing, when he announced that he was coming back for this next year. So whether this year is his last year or next year will be, it's not going to be like he's coaching at Utah in 7 years. It's now or never for that program. It's now or never for Kyle. He's been one of the best coaches in the last 2 decades across college football. Doesn't have a national championship. Not that I don't think Utah is going to win one this year, but I think they're going to be much, much better. And they're a program that you can just, no matter where you are in the country, you can root for Utah. They're going to play the game, quote unquote, the right way. They prioritize the offensive line, blocking, the run game. They don't rely on the quarterback to necessarily win games. But I will say, if Utah does have a quarterback that can win games for them, watch out. And if Devin Dampier is that guy, Utah, if you close your eyes, you can just tell. You can just tell me right now, Utah is going to be strong on defensively. They're going to have a defensive line that can get after. They're going to have a secondary that will play tough physical football, and their offensive line will block well. If their quarterback and run game are up to par, I think everyone in the Big 12 should be mildly nervous about what Utah could be and maybe they could, quote unquote, establish order back in the Big 12. That's why it's interesting to me. I would take the over on the 7.5 win total. I'm optimistic. I'm high on the team, but I guess we'll have to wait and see for this next year. So those were the 2 kind of interesting coaches I want to bring up this year. Like I said, neither of those guys are really not successful. They are both successful, but neither of those guys are the most famous coaches in college football. They're not your Kirby Smarts and Lincoln Riley's, the guys that we've talked about so much. But they're amongst the most interesting coaches for me, and for very different reasons. So we'll get into more coaches as podcasts go on. But speaking of really successful coaches, I want to talk about Kirby Smart. There's no secret when Nick Saban retired, there was essentially a vacuum left in the sport for coaches to say their part, say their piece, be active, and stand up for coaching rights sounds weird, but stand up for the livelihoods in the profession of coaching college football. Nick Saban was that guy. He had the microphone. He felt comfortable calling out programs, platforms, organizations when he saw fit. He never thought that he always saw that it was his responsibility to do so. So when looking at that in the last year since his retirement, a lot of people wanted Kirby Smart or another major program head coach who's also had extreme success like Kirby, like Nick, to step in that role, to fill that void. Well, I would argue that, not argue, I remember listening to other shows last year, and they asked him about that. It's like, do you feel like it's incumbent on you, Kirby, to be that guy, to stand up, to be the voice for the coaches that don't feel like they're in a place in their career where they can be the voice. Well, Kirby Smart went on the Paul Feinbaum show and in the last week, and he had some quotes about NIL, the NIL structure, and I want to start with Kirby said, "I just want to be able to have a freshman come in, not make more than a senior, and I'd like for other sports to still survive. We're on the brink of probably 1 to 2 years away from a lot of schools cutting sports." What Kirby's talking about there is not necessarily a threat to the NCAA or other athletic departments, but it's reality. When revenue sharing comes into play, obviously it will bring good things for college football, to bring structure to the NIL landscape, to try to reduce and eliminate the pay-for-play nature of some recruiting. But with that said, there's with that said, there's a lot of people who don't want to discuss the ramifications of revenue sharing, the house settlement that's going to come down. Essentially, a lot of the NIL procedures will fall to the athletic departments themselves. Athletic departments will have up to $21 million a year to distribute to athletes across all of their sports. Not just football, not just basketball, but their payroll will have to be $21 million across all their sports, and they'll have to figure out how they want to do that. I don't know about you. I trying to find $21 extra or $200 extra when I didn't have it budgeted in my account. That's kind of hard for me. Now imagine you're in an athletic department, you have to try to find $21 million extra. Now, not every program is going to be using that. A lot of programs are going to go $13 million to football, $6 million to basketball, and then distribute the rest through scholarship aid and whatnot to the other non-revenue generating sports. But there's people who aren't considering the fact that these athletic departments are going to have to come up with those $21 million, and either that includes fundraising, getting money from donors, which would be great. In a perfect world, you ask for $21 million from your top donor and he hands it to you. But in reality, most of these programs are going to have to be figuring out where they can find $21 million in their ledgers. They're going to have to figure out, unfortunately, what sports they might have to cut. Unfortunately, what programs they put on for their fans, or campaigns they put on, or hires employees they have within the athletic department. Where can they find that money? And it might not be for the full, but it's still any bit helps to get to that point. Some fans I've read have said that Kirby's just kind of being a jackass for saying this, which I think is bullshit. But some fans are basically saying he's being a jackass for saying this, and he's only saying this quote because he's scared of the fact that other programs have caught up to him because of NIL, and they're going to catch up even more when everyone's allowed to pay their players through revenue sharing. In general, I think that's bullshit. I don't think Kirby is the type of personality or the leader to be scared or back down from any fight. Obviously, he's going to want to make things easier on himself, but it's not that the NIL game would no longer like tilt in Georgia's favor that pisses off Kirby. It's the fact that all of college football, and I don't think anyone can deny this, is in a state of flux. And we have to figure out the best way to fix that. And unfortunately, some sports, some non-revenue generating sports, will likely be cut from a lot of major P4, P5 universities. All in all, I'm not saying that Kirby is completely 100% right in his estimation that a lot of schools are going to be cutting players, but it's not wrong. It's going to happen, and it sucks. In general, I think it's good that Kirby wanted to speak on this fact and wanted to make his voice heard. Obviously, whenever we get coaches on major networks or Feinbaum, they'll try to get quotes like this out of them. But this might be the first time that we'll see Kirby really step out in there and make his voice heard. Another thing he said in that quote, and I'll pop it back up, that I think is really fascinating is the beginning. I just want to be able to have a freshman come in and not make more than a senior. Obviously, in pay for play right now with NIL recruiting, freshmen, especially the high star freshmen that Kirby likely has, they're going to make a ton of money just because they chose to play for Georgia. What he's saying right now is I don't want to have seniors on the roster who are making, let's say, 20 grand, 50 grand, 100 grand. And Kirby just signed or got a commitment out of one of the top quarterbacks in the country last week in Jackson Curtis. Not Jackson, in Curtis. And what ended up, the numbers came out, and he was probably going to be paid over $1 million. So Kirby could have a senior offensive lineman, all SEC kid, making 200 grand, realize that he's blocking for a true freshman, 18-year-old quarterback who's making $1.75 million a year because Georgia had to fight for him extra hard NIL-wise. So why is that quote even interesting? It kind of speaks to what the revenue sharing structure should bring. It's if you come to Georgia, hey, here you're going to be making, I should probably use this arms, but you're probably going to be making this amount now as a freshman just because you are at the University of Georgia. And then as a sophomore, it'll bump up to here if you stay and not go in the portal. As a junior, it'll bump up to here. And as a senior, if you choose to stay, it'll bump up to there. And on top of all of that, you'll have NIL offerings for a traditional sense of NIL, having brands, local companies partner with you as the athlete to for you to actually make money off your name, image, and likeness, and not just for your recruitment. In general, I think, as I said, there's I see no lies in anything he said. You want some sort of clarity and structure in college football, and I think that's what every coach is looking for. And it's really exciting for me as a college football fan, as a podcast host now, to see Kirby taking the reins a little bit, being an advocate for the sport, being an advocate for his team. And anyone who's saying that he's doing that just because revenue sharing would reduce Georgia's impact on how they recruit right now with that NIL pay for play, I think they're just scared, and their teams have lost to Georgia or Kirby or programs like Georgia too much, so they're just a little butthurt. That is my overall thoughts on Kirby Smart. We went over the most interesting coaches. We're moving pretty quick today. I promise you, I thought this is a jam-packed show, but I'm obviously without Jace here. We're running through it a lot quicker, but no harm, no foul. Let's get into our third segment. I was preparing for the show this morning, and I was trying to come up with topics, build graphics, all that stuff. And I came across this article on collegefootballnews.com. So obviously, take it with a grain of salt. But there was they came out with an article regarding strength of schedules for college football teams, and they ranked everyone from the top strength of schedule team to the very last place, to the easiest strength of schedule, to Akron, let's say. All 120 something FBS programs in college football were on that list, and I gotta hand it to them. They did. They definitely put a lot of work into it. But you look at the top 5 toughest schedules in 2025. I want to start with just the top 5. Number 1 is Florida. Last year they already had, I would argue, the hardest schedule in college football history. It was ridiculous, and Billy Napier, obviously the team wasn't strong, but they bounced back and finished the season off strong enough for him to keep his job. But he's fighting for his life. He was fighting for his life last year. And what does he get rewarded for winning the final few games and ending the season on a high note? The number 1 hardest schedule in college football. Number 2, Wisconsin. Their hardest game is at Alabama on September 13th. Luke Fickell, definitely not looking forward to that. Number 3, UCLA. Their hardest game is November 15th in the shoe at Ohio State. Number 4, Mississippi State. They're playing Georgia at home November 8th. Obviously, SEC programs are going to have hard schedules. We've gotten into that before. Number 5, Arkansas. They play Notre Dame on September 27th. But before I get into my observation, think about it. Number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Florida, Wisconsin, UCLA, Mississippi State, Arkansas, in that order, according to this website, have the toughest schedules in the 2025 college football season. Bonkers. The fact that obviously scheduling in college football is not as simple or an easy ball game as it is in like the NFL, where if you finish in first place, you're probably going to get a tougher schedule next year. If you finish in last place, you're going to get last place schedule. By the way, not college football. I would take the Raiders over this year. Last place schedule. But let's start with number 5 and number 1 and number 2. Florida, Wisconsin, Arkansas, 1, 2, 5. Each of those coaches, Sam Pittman, Luke Fickell, and Billy Napier, I wouldn't say are all on the proverbial hot seat. I think Sam Pittman is, without a good season this year, without being over 500, without an 8-4 at least, Sam Pittman's going to be gone at the end of the year. I'm sorry, there's no ifs, ands, or buts there. He's done a good job. We've talked about Sam Pittman on the show before. He's had good years. He's done an overall good job. But he's had some pretty disappointing years at Arkansas, and it feels like their growth has plateaued. In a season that he wants to save his job, he has the 5th hardest schedule in all of college football. Number 4, Mississippi State. Jeff Lebby entering year 2. He took over a pretty unfortunate situation last year. Obviously, Mike Leach suddenly passed 2 years ago. They gave the job to their interim for a year. That didn't work out. Interim gets fired. They hire Jeff Lebby. He didn't take over much. There wasn't much of a program there for him to take over. As a new college football coach, you're looking for growth. You're looking for momentum. You're looking for the ability to show recruits, hey, I know we're not winning now, but this is, if you come here, this is what we can do for you, and this is how we can all win together. they got rewarded with the number 4 hardest schedule in college football this year. How tough would it be for them to develop that momentum to grow? Obviously, they're not going to back down from a fight. They're always going to show up ready to compete, have their game plans ready. But man, it's so much easier if their strength of schedule was 27, not number 4. Number 3, UCLA. Very similar reasons. Deshaun Foster didn't take over much at UCLA last season. It feels like there were already some people who were doubting the Deshaun Foster experience at UCLA. Not because he's recruiting poorly. He's recruiting better than Chip Kelly did when he was there. But, I mean, we all remember his freeze at the Big Ten Media Days last year. We know that they didn't do well last year in general on the field. But he's rebuilding. Same reasons as Jeff Lebby. He needs any ounce of light from his team to show recruits, to show donors, hey, we're for real. We just need to get you in the building. And unfortunately, he was rewarded with the number 3 hardest schedule in the country. And then another hot seat guy, 2 more hot seat guys. Number 2, Wisconsin, Luke Fickell. I wouldn't say he would be fired this year with a mid-season. I would say if they have a bad year again, he's probably going to be gone. The Wisconsin was one of those schools that they didn't need to fire Paul Chryst. They didn't need to fire their coach, but with the new Big Ten money coming in, they kind of decided, okay, being good is not good enough anymore. We need to be great. Now, I think Luke Fickell's a great coach. Last year, they kind of fell on to, I wouldn't say hard times, but it definitely isn't ideal when your starting quarterback that just transferred in gets hurt for the season as early as Tyler Van Dyke did last year. So who knows what their record would have been. All I know is a lot of athletic departments, a lot of fans at least, see just the wins and loss column. And he might not be on the exact hot seat right now, but he's also not in a position where he can be comfortable necessarily with the number 2 hardest schedule in college football. And then, from what I started this segment on to where we are now, Billy Napier at number 1, Florida at number 1 after having I will constantly say it, the hardest schedule in college football history last year. They went through a gauntlet, and Billy Napier was essentially fired after week 1, after week 2, after week 3. I remember after the week 3 game, I believe, there were reports that Florida's planning a press conference. Billy Napier looks like he's gone. Looks like he's fired on like the Tuesday of the week. Apparently, some high-profile donors had their opinions outweigh other donors within the program. They took control of it. They saved Billy Napier's job. Billy Napier's not going to run from this, but I bet you he didn't want the hardest schedule in the country again this year. And they obviously, they're going to go through a gauntlet again. It's not going to be great, but hopefully the team's ready for it. And I want to point out in general, what I'm saying right now isn't that all of these coaches are going to be necessarily fired or they're all in the hot seat. I'm just trying to make an observation about how fickle and cruel college football can be. Florida, Wisconsin, Arkansas. Each of them have coaches that need to win this year. Maybe they won't be fired, but if they're not fired this year, next year is the make or break. They got a top 5 hardest schedule, each of them. And then UCLA, Mississippi State, that not necessarily do you need an easy schedule. Not necessarily do you need to be able to have easy games. I'm not saying that. But you just want the ability to show your players that you can win, instill belief in your coaching staff and to your players that, hey, how we're doing things is working. And if you're going to constantly play teams that are just way better than you, it's going to be really hard to get up off the ground and build momentum to rebuild Mississippi State or UCLA. So that was more of an observation for me. It wasn't necessarily a matter of, hey, all these coaches are going to get fired, or boo-hoo, or like pity these teams because they all have hard schedules. It's the fact that the teams that have the hardest schedules are the teams that probably were praying most for a middle of the tier or a weaker schedule. They're SEC programs and some Big Ten programs, they can't help it. They're going to get harder schedules just because of the conference they're in. But at least, like, there are some teams around the SEC, if you look at their schedules, it doesn't even look like they're playing the same sport as Florida did last year. And that goes to show what Josh Pate always says is the old adage, you are what your record says you are, is bullshit. Because if Florida goes 6-6 this year, or 8-4 this year, let's say they go 8-4 this year, Billy Napier might get fired because of the number 8-4. If you were honestly looking at their schedule and saw 8-4 as a bad thing with where Florida is on their progression, then I'm sorry, I don't know what to tell you. But then on the contrary though, if Florida does break out the way Jace and I have talked about, they could think about, like, if they go 11-1, 10-2 with that schedule, that has to be a playoff team. They earned that, just beating beating the teams that they have, getting to the record that they are. So those were the main observations I made. I do want to get into a couple more, a couple minor observations. Like, I think if you gave these coaches truth serum, I wrote it down here. I think if you gave them truth serum, like, they would just be pissed. No one's going to say it publicly in general, but they have every right to be frustrated. Oh, here we go. Here's some other notable rankings, trying to back up my point. And 60th in the country, Tennessee. So if anyone who's doubting the fact that, oh, Mississippi State, Arkansas, Florida, they're in the SEC, they're always going to have hard schedules. Tennessee's got, by this regard, average schedule. Number 46, Georgia. Their hardest game is Alabama. Their easiest game is Austin Peay. Tennessee's hardest game is Georgia. Their easiest game is Eastern Tennessee State. So Georgia and Tennessee are two SEC programs. They're both in the 40s and 60s. Texas Tech, they have them at 69th in the country. And Texas Tech, I think I would put money down on them being really, really good this year. But now if you look at the schedule, their strength of schedule entering the year, it makes me want to double down on that. It's not a matter of take pity on the programs in, like, with Sam Pittman, or feel bad for these guys. I know they're making a lot of money, but they all. Saying fair is a dumb line in a competitive field. But if you're Florida right now and you're trying to think about how I got to win this year to save my job and to rebuild trust with my donors, my boosters, that I know we've gone through some bumps, but my way works. And then you get the tough schedule that you do. Again, you're like, what the hell, man? If you're Luke Fickell, who, not necessarily by your fault, your team hasn't taken off in the couple years you've been there the way everyone assumed it would. And now you got a tough schedule on top of that. You're just like, what the hell? If you're Jeff Lebby or Deshaun Foster, you're just trying to get your team off the ground. You're not trying to win a national championship this year. But I'll tell you what, if you're UCLA or Mississippi State and you had a 65th ranked schedule, 72nd ranked schedule, and you went 6-6, nothing great. You went 5-7, nothing great. But at least it shows progression from last year. It shows recruits, hey, this is why we won the games that we did, but this is also why you're going to help us win the games that we didn't. It's going to be hard to find progression with the tough schedules those two teams have. It's just, I'm repeating myself over and over again. This isn't necessarily like a massive topic. For me, it was just an interesting observation, at least, as I made my way throughout the college football stories of, are we sure we're this playing field and everything is equal across all the conferences, which obviously it's not. And it's another sign of how cruel college football can be, but it's also a reason we all love college football for this exact, in this exact way. So from there, we're going to go back to my overall full. Very quick podcast. About, it says 51:34. So I'll take that. I thank everyone for listening in. Solo podcasts are hard, but they're a little daunting because there's no one on the other side to either to help spell me or spell them from their takes. It's also, I know it's also like the fact that not everyone loves my takes, not everyone loves Jace's takes, but at least we're here together to be able to keep each other in check. But with that said, this has been really fun. I really hope that from the initial conversations about the interesting coaches to our conversations about Kirby Smart to our strength of schedule conversation, you took something home from that. They are mostly observations. They weren't like major stories in college football, but I thought it was overall very interesting for me as I was doing my own show prep. Jace will be back next week. As I mentioned, he's on a family trip, and we'll see him next week. For you guys, as always, please follow us on Twitter at F4Discussion, YouTube Flagged for Discussion, TikTok at Flagged for Discussion. We're everywhere on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Find us wherever you get your podcasts. Last week, we saw the ratings go up on those. So I'm going to give the same homework assignment. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other digital platform, give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed this. I want to see those go up. I want to see how many people listen there compared to YouTube. And if you're on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. It would mean the world for us. As we are growing, and I'm trying to slowly but surely add some fun stuff graphically, visually to the YouTube side to encourage our listeners and viewers. If you're not driving, if you're at home, put it up on your TV, put it on your computer. Hang out with us for an hour while we try to talk about college football. Jace will be back next week. Jace will be back next week. We'll have another jam-packed show. It's been a lot of fun on my end, but thanks for everyone for listening. Farbod Merkazi, it's been Flagged for Discussion.